Want to know what causes sugar cravings? Watch this video to learn why we crave sweet foods and what you can do about it. Now, I often get asked, what is the number one piece of advice you'd give someone to improve their health? And I always respond with the same thing. Cut sugar out of your diet, like completely. As I mentioned in the intro, I'm an advocate of low carb, real food diets. But if you're sugar addicted, then even the thought of drastically cutting out your carbs might be enough to bring you out in a cold sweat. And if that sounds like you, then don't worry, you're in the right place. In this video, I'm going to be diving deep into the brain to help you understand why we get sugar cravings. And then I'm going to be breaking down some of the different ways I use to help my patients and private coaching clients eliminate sugar from their diets. So let's get started by looking at what causes sugar cravings. Firstly, it's important to understand that we're hardwired to crave sweet foods. It's an evolutionary response that comes from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and actually probably our non-human ancestors before them too. So on the one hand, we have things that taste overwhelmingly bitter, and we know these foods are probably ones that we shouldn't be consuming. In fact, the bitter tastes act as a deterrent, a signal to be careful when eating. Sweet foods, on the other hand, taste good to encourage us to eat them. Foods that taste sweet do so to signal to animals that they're safe to consume. And a lot of fruits actually rely on animal consumption for the spreading of their seeds. But to really understand why humans have developed this addiction to sugar, we need to understand what it does to our brains. Let's talk about dopamine. So what is dopamine? Dopamine is a chemical in the brain that allows nerve cells to communicate. It acts as a reward released in the body when we complete survival tasks such as sourcing food. It's a vital chemical our bodies produce to encourage life-sustaining behaviours. Ultimately, it encourages growth and development and chemically underpins our desire to survive. Dopamine is also important in other things in the body. Movement, for example, and reduced dopamine production is a feature of Parkinson's disease and can be treated using synthetic dopamine-like drugs. Whereas an excess of dopamine can result in the brain signaling unnecessary movements, causing tics. It's also involved in pleasure-seeking behavior. Dopamine is the chemical that controls pleasure in the brain. It stimulates us to seek out pleasurable things, which could be sourcing food or sex, and therefore procreation. So hopefully you're starting to see that dopamine and food are strongly linked. In fact, dopamine is released when we see and smell food, and yet more dopamine is released when we eat. But if we eat the same food over and over again, it takes more food for dopamine to be released. As a result, we no longer feel as satisfied from the dish as when we once did, and we're less inclined to eat us. So this is our brain chemistry actually making us bored with food if we eat the same thing over and over again. So why would our brains do this? Well, it's an evolutionary response that encourages us to eat a varied diet. However, when it comes to refined sugars, as we know them in the modern world, such as sucrose or high fructose corn syrup, we seem to be losing the benefits of this evolutionary trait altogether. So why is sugar addictive when other food is not? But when we consume sugar, the brain produces huge surges of dopamine. Over time, our bodies get used to these high levels of dopamine, and when we aren't eating those sugary foods, we start to crave them. And in many ways, sugar addiction is similar to drug addiction. When humans take cocaine or heroin, a huge surge of dopamine is released, and that's what makes these drugs addictive, and when tolerance starts to build, deadly. There are of course large differences with cocaine and heroin addiction versus sugar addiction. Cocaine and heroin lead to severe instant health concerns, as well as significant social problems. Sugar addiction, on the other hand, plays a much more subtle role in the deterioration of our health, taking a long time to become apparent, and symptoms that may seem somewhat harmless, such as afternoon headaches or sugar cravings or frequent dips in our mood. And as we start to eat more sugar to allow for the high production of a dopamine, our bodies start to build a tolerance and we start to require more and more of it to feel the benefit from this feel-good hormone. The more our bodies are used to this, the slower the dopamine response and the more we need to get that feel-good dopamine hit. So now we know that the more sugar we eat, the more sugar we need to consume for dopamine to be released in the brain. So before we get into the next section and address sugar addiction, I want to ask, do you or have you ever struggled with sugar addiction? Let me know by simply writing yes or no in the comments down below. I'll go first. Yes, I've absolutely struggled with sugar addiction in the past. And even now that I've been low carb for nearly 4 years, if I have a break from the diet, for example, for a special occasion and I consume sugar, I very quickly feel the same desire to consume more sugar again. So let's start the second half of this video by asking, if sugar is so addictive, how do I cut down? Firstly, the bad news. Cutting down on your sugar intake is no easy task. It requires commitment and a strong desire to improve your health. Removing sugar from the diet can cause withdrawal symptoms such as headaches, fatigue, dips in mood, cramps, and in severe cases, even nausea. Now, the good news. When we start to cut down our sugar intake, our body readjusts and our tolerance decreases, meaning we need to consume less sugar to get the same feel-good dopamine hit. You can train your body not to crave sugar, and in doing so, retrain your taste buds to get rid of that sweet tooth. It actually takes only about a week of no sugar consumption for taste buds to completely reset to normal, and you will be amazed at how incredibly sweet those sweet treats taste after a week of no sugar. And after a few weeks of reducing our sugar intake, dopamine will start to be released more quickly in response to consuming sugar, and we won't need as much to feel satisfied. Now, there are a couple of approaches that work for people, and ultimately it's about finding out what works for you. Option 1 is quitting cold turkey. Maybe you're an all or nothing person like me. Quitting sugar cold turkey can work for certain people. In order to quit cold turkey effectively, it helps to be organised and have an action plan. Before quitting, go through your food supplies and get rid of the sugary stuff. If you don't have access to sugary foods, you're more likely to succeed. Remember, this is addiction we're dealing with, and if you were trying to give up smoking, you wouldn't want to have a packet of cigarettes at home, would you? Make sure you have recipe ideas ready and a fully stocked fridge full of the new foods you're excited to be eating. Things to note about quitting cold turkey: depending on your previous sugar intake levels, you may experience withdrawal symptoms, and there are some nice easy ways to combat those. If you start to experience headaches in the afternoon, start by eating 1 or 2 squares of dark 70% plus chocolate in the mornings with a glass of water. Dark chocolate contains magnesium, which acts as a muscle relaxant in the body. Magnesium, as a result, can be an effective assistant for migraine and headache relief, while also being an ideal food to satisfy sugar cravings. Quitting sugar cold turkey for some is incredibly difficult, where some people can just go the full way and go straight onto a low carb diet. But I do understand that this can be intimidating for some people, and the all or nothing approach can be pretty overwhelming. So if that's you, then why not try option 2, which is making gradual changes. If this resonates with you, try this simple level up technique. Just take a look at your standard daily food intake. Identify places that could be improved. For example, let's say in the morning you're rushing to get to work and you grab a chocolate croissant and a coffee with 2 sugars from your local coffee shop and eat them in the car. Been there, done that. For 1 week, try leveling up this meal by swapping out this routine for a healthier one. For breakfast, why not whip up a batch of high protein chorizo and egg low carb breakfast muffins. They are 0 sugar and the protein in them encourages dopamine production. Protein will also help to reduce sugar cravings as it makes you feel full and satisfied for longer. Now, this may already be a huge change to your daily routine, so avoid leveling up on any other area of your diet until you're confident in this new habit. And if this simply isn't working for you, try leveling up a different aspect of your diet instead. No one's perfect, and trial and error is key in this approach. Another idea might be to look into the afternoon snack habit. For example, let's say you work in an office job and at 3:30 every day, you and your colleagues have a tea and biscuit break. You might like this routine and don't want to get rid of it. After all, it's part of what you like about working where you do. It's sociable and signals that the workday is coming to a close. It's important to recognize what this break does for you and think of ways you can keep it without consuming the sugar. Maybe you start to bring your own savory snack into the office and ask your colleagues to make you a herbal tea instead of your English breakfast with 1 sugar. It might be helpful to tell the people around you what you're trying to achieve in reducing your sugar intake. Maybe even some of them might want to do the same thing. The more people who know about your journey, the more encouraging they'll be, hopefully, and the more careful they should be sharing food around the office that you've expressed that you're trying to stay away from. Another really important thing to remember is to drink water, and this sounds like a really obvious one, but when you're starting your day with a tall glass of water, they can really help curb those cravings throughout the day. We know that thirst can often be confused with hunger, and sometimes when we're craving something sweet, really we're just dehydrated. In moments where you start to feel a sugar craving, have a glass of water and wait a few minutes. If you're still hungry, perhaps then choose a healthy snack option at that point. Guys, ultimately, whichever way you decide to give up the sugar, you're going to be on the right path, whatever works for you. And remember that falling off the wagon is part of the journey. And if you do make a bad choice at the beginning of the day, it shouldn't necessarily dictate the fate of the rest of your day. Try to identify why you fell out of the good habits and hop right back on the wagon to continue to take control of your health. Make sure you prepare as much as possible to set you up for success with recipes at the ready that satisfy your sugar cravings. After a short while of cutting down sugar, your body will start to respond to sugar consumption in a healthier way, and you will start to crave sugar less and less. The more you practice lowering your sugar consumption, the easier it gets, I promise you. And then we can start thinking about cutting the rest of the carbs down. That's it from me today. If you like this video, please let me know by liking it down below and sharing it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and leave me a comment down below this video if it's helped you.